So in this video, we're going to be building a 6S premium FPV quadcopter. Now this is a 6S Freestyle quadcopter. As you can tell, it's pretty large. And this is a somewhat of a unique frame here because it takes 3 stacks. Look at that. We have the electronic speed controller here, flight controller here, and the VTX here. Now what we're going to do in this video is we're going to build it together. I'm going to take it step by step, show you how to solder, and I'll also teach you some techniques and some things to watch out for, and the whole idea of how a quadcopter is put together. Now this can be translated to any other quadcopter build. So let's start with talking about the components that I'm going to be using here. Now, before starting, a word from our sponsor. PCBWay is one of the leading PCB manufacturers that I even use on a daily basis, not only to do my projects, but also some of the products that I've designed that's currently in the market, like the drone mesh VUSB, and I'm constantly using them for prototyping, and I'm also using their assembly services, and they also do have flashing services for specific hardware requirements, so it's a really great place to have your PCB manufactured or prototyped. Now, for the ESC and motors, I'm using these Flywoo motors. It comes in a combo. It's a pretty premium combo here, and as you can tell, they're really nice gold plated. I don't know if it's real gold plated, but it just looks absolutely phenomenal in real life. So this ESC comes with these motors. I'm also using the Flywoo F405 flight controller here. This is a pretty great flight controller, and we're going to do more testing on it on the channel right now. For the frame, I'm also using a Flywoo frame. Everything here is linked down below if you want to go ahead and check it out. Now, for the video transmitter, I'm going to be using the Rush Tank Ultimate Mini. This is the latest and greatest from Rush, and their transmitters have been absolutely insane. I've been testing them on a couple quads, and I'm starting to fall in love with them. These are premium video transmitters that have everything you could think of, from smart audio, which means you could change the channel through the on-screen display without having to come here and press the button, and they even provide MMCX and connectors, or you could solder directly to them, and I really like that, and I find that very convenient, easy to use, and it's just an overall very great package. Now, we will also need some Xt60 connectors. I'll have some linked down below because if I remember correctly, either the kit didn't come with it or I used it for something else. So you're going to need some Xt60s. It's always great to have spares with you here. So I'll have some linked down below in case you need some. Also, we're going to need really long wires. Now, what's really great with the camera that I'm currently using, this is called the Foxeer Nano. And this is one of the fastest cameras in terms of latency I've tested. And I really want to put it to the test on this build here. And the latency was like 1.2 seconds. And an acceptable latency is like 25 milliseconds and below. So this is like in an insane zone of like just under 2 millisecond latency. That means it just takes 2 milliseconds to get to your eyes, which is pretty insane. So I'm going to be testing it on this build here. Now, what's really great is they also provide you with a bunch of long wires, which I've also repurposed because I'm going to need a very long wire to go from the video transmitter down to the flight controller here, and that's where I got these wires from. For the receiver, since I'm running FRSky, I'm going to be using an XM Plus radio. These are really great, really cheap, really small, and very light, and they have really great range. And this is the reason why I'm choosing to use an XM Plus here. Now, also on any 6S build, you really want to add a low ESR capacitor. These are very important. I'll have some linked down below. Make sure you get the correct voltage. For example, we're running a 6S, so you want at least of a minimum of 35 volt low ESR capacitor. And again, I'll have some linked down below. So yeah, even if you're running a 4S, it's highly recommended you add these, and I'll show you where to add them. They usually go straight to the ESC here. For tools, I definitely would recommend this. I've been using it for quite a while, and it comes with every single tool head you'll ever need for a quadcopter. This is all I use now. For example, cameras usually do a 1.5 millimeter. This has the 1.5 millimeter, and frames usually are around 2 millimeter heads, and also some motors use 2.5. And this toolkit provides you with every single size you'll need. For cutter, I use this one. I got it from Banggood a while ago because mine kind of just rusted out, and I've been using this for about a year and a half now, and it's still strong and absolutely beautiful to use. This is what I use to strip all my wires. For my soldering station, you can get these little portable ones, the TS100. I'll have linked down below. They're really cheap, and they just run off of a laptop power supply, which are really great. I use that on the field with me so I could plug in a battery and do some modifications if I needed to replace a motor or something. And for my main soldering station, I'll have it linked down below. It's called the Gordag 863. It's an insane beast, which I've been using for about a year now. Now, what I like to do with any build is start out with the flight controller because that has the most things that are going to be connected to, and it just makes everything so much easier. For example, we'll start soldering in our receiver, our camera wires, which we could easily just pop out the connector, solder those in, and also our VTX wires that are going to run down to our video transmitter. And I think that's currently it that we'll need that's going to the flight controller, because the ESC will be connected through this connector, and that'll do most of the work for us. Usually that is the most time consuming part, which we really don't have to care about here. And it's really nice that it just connects via connector here. And this is really great, especially if you're new. It's just a lot less to solder onto place. Now, the first thing I like to do is to start applying the solder to the board, to all the pads that we're going to need, and it'll just make everything so much easier. So right here, what we see is VO. So this is going to be for our video transmitter. So we have a T4 pad, and that'll play a big role later for something called smart audio, which means you could change the channel and power through the on-screen display without having going to the transmitter and just keep pressing the buttons to get on the correct channel. So that was T4 right there. Then we have VO. This would be the video out pad, which the video would go straight down to your video transmitter. So the third pad is the 9-volt pad, which is going to be a 9-volt regulator, which means we'll have a higher probability of having really great video feed. That's really awesome. You always want to kind of look for a 9-volt pad, and that is just an awesome extra feature to have always. And the last one is ground, which will be our black wire. Now here on the left side, we have our camera connection. Now I highly recommend, especially if you're right-handed, do not solder like this, because if you hit this ribbon cable here, that'll just create nightmares. So what you can do is just flip it away from you, especially if you're right-handed. And now we have a less probability of hitting the ribbon cable right there. So I'm just going to add solder to these guys. We'll cover what they are once we start putting in the wires into place here. So like this, we have our camera pads into place, and this is going to be VI here. We're not going to need this one. This one is for special cameras that we don't really need. VI is going to be the video input. So it's going to be the yellow wire coming in from the camera. Then we have 5-volt, and then we have ground, and this will power up the camera. So 5-volt and ground and video. That's all we'll need here. So the next thing that's going to be connected is our receiver. Now this is very important because this is an F4 microcontroller unit, which means FRSky cannot be connected anywhere. It has to be connected on a specific pad. And on the specifications of this flight controller, it says R3 is where the FRSky S bus will be connected to. So we would connect it right there. Then we have our 5-volt and ground. So if you had iBus, where you'd want to connect it is any other R pad, for example. So if you had an iBus, you wouldn't be able to put the signal wire onto the R3 here, but you can put the 5-volt and ground in the same place. And where you want to run the signal would be to another R pad, for example, the R6 pad. And that's how we would set that up. And later on, we'll go into the Betaflight configuration and we'll see how to enable that correctly. But right now, like this, we're basically done. We can just start adding our wires into place and take it from there. So I want to go ahead and start with the camera wires here. So we see we have 3 colors. Usually they come the same way color coded, which is red is going to be 5-volt always, yellow is the video, and black is the ground. It's always like that unless there's some sort of an issue with your wiring, which is a very rare case. Now what we want to do is let's find the ground first, or actually since I'm right-handed, I'd prefer to start with the left side because the soldering iron would just make it a lot easier to move to the right instead of moving like this, and then have less probability of hitting another pad here. So what we're going to need is the VI, which is going to be this one. So the VI here is going to be the video input, and that's the one we're going to start off with, and we're going to add the yellow wire because that's going to be our video signal. Now you might be like, why can't we just install the video directly to the video transmitter? Well, you can, but you will lose something, which is the on-screen display, which has very, very important information such as your battery voltage. Because what really goes on here is your yellow wire would go into the video input, go through this chip right here, which is the OSD chip, and then pop out to the video output that's going to your VTX, so you get all that information down in your goggles. Now the next pad over is the 5-volt pad, which is going to be the red wire here. Now I want to just make this a little bit shorter here. Never cut a wire on top of the flight controller because a little strand could go in and actually cause a really bad short circuit, and it could ruin your whole flight controller. So keep that in mind. Always cut away from any electronics that you're working on so you don't have that problem happen to you. And the last one is going to be ground, which is right here. And it's very difficult for me to see because it's really far, and I'm trying to optimize the best viewing angle for you guys. All right, and now we have our camera wires basically done. So we're done with the camera. Let's go ahead and do the VTX here. Now, since I'm using my own wires, usually it's a yellow that would be where the video line would go. All right, so right now we're gonna use the white wire as the theoretical yellow wire, which would be your video signal. Now, as you can tell here, we have 4 wires, not just the power, which is the ground and the 9-volt. We also have an extra wire other than the video, and that's going to be the smart audio protocol, which will just enable you to change the settings of the video transmitter through the on-screen display. So we're going to set that up on T4. Now, remember T4 because T4 is going to play a big role in the configuration part once we get to that. So we just set T4 for smart audio, and then the next thing we need the white wire for video, and that's going to go right there. I'm going to touch the pad, and then I'm just going to touch the wire into place. That's really great. Now, if you're having a really hard time getting the solder to melt that fast and that easy, make sure your tip looks like this. If it's very clean, add some solder, clean it off, and make sure it looks like that. And if it's still very hard, then just increase your temperature maybe by 30 degrees Celsius or so. So my next pad currently is going to be the 9-volt, and that's going to be the red wire here. So I'm just going to put it into place, and I'm going to come in from the pad area, and then everything should melt really nicely. Then touch the wire. And same thing goes for the ground here. So I'm just going to come in, and boom. Now, and again, before I started soldering these wires, what I did was I stripped them, I twisted them as best as I could, and then I added solder to them. And that'll just make it overall very nice. And as you can tell, now we're twisting the wires. Now, it's really good to twist the wires, especially if they're going to be really long like this, because the ground kind of will help against RF noise, so like lines in your video feed. Hopefully, we're not going to have any of those issues, but it's really great, especially if you have a ground wire, to twist them, and it also makes everything a little bit more cleaner here. So now we're done with the VTX part here. We're going to connect the other side once we get to that step. Next thing we need to do is install our receiver, which is going to be right here. So we said R3, 5-volt, and then ground. So right now I'm going to get R3, which is going to be my signal, which is going to be the yellow wire. Now what I like to do here, especially when they're holes, this might be a little bit difficult. And again, I've already added solder on the wire here. So I'd heat up the pad, and then I try to find the hole and stick the wire through the hole. Now don't attempt this if you're not very confident, because a small wire strand, if it's just stuck out slightly, then you could have a really bad nightmare and just short circuit everything and ruin your flight controller or your receiver or some other things as well. So if you're not that confident, it's okay, just put it in or just put it on top and it's totally fine. For example here, so right now this isn't the best of jobs currently, but I'm okay, I'm satisfied with it right now. And that's not going to be touching anything anytime soon here. So now our receiver's done. Basically our flight controller is complete here, yeah. Maybe we'll add GPS later onto it depending on how much traction this video gets. So now the flight controller is done. Let's go jump to the ESC. Now what we're going to do is connect the motors. Now we're going to do one motor together, and then I'm just going to skip the rest just to make the video not that long. And we're also going to cover the Xt60 part and the low ESR capacitor part, because these are very important parts. So the first thing I like to do, and again, is add solder to the pads. Now what I highly recommend you do first is increase the temperature slightly on your soldering iron in order for it to stick a little bit easier here. So I'm just going to touch the pad, just heat it up a little, and start bringing in the solder. Keep moving it until I see enough has stuck on. There we go. That looks nice. Same thing I'm going to do to the other one. Okay. And again, I've already cut and stripped the wires and twisted them and added solder to them. So it's going to stick really nicely and very easily. Now, I highly recommend also use a tweezer when you're going to start soldering in the motor wires, because they can get so hot to the point where you might let go and you might bridge something and make an absolute nightmare. And you want to make sure with the wires you never have let go and it just bounces off like that, because the solder would just splatter places, and it could create short circuits and you can just blow out your whole quadcopter. So keep that in mind and be very careful, because that could ruin your experience, and you could just start saying, oh, this product is a piece of crap. When I got it, it just didn't work, but it was actually a user fault. So right here we just have a little problem. We've already kind of bridged them, or it looks like it, at least I bridged them, because I'm a bit far away from this. So you kind of get an idea. Hopefully you can get the technique from here. And again, if it's not melting this easy, then you should just increase the temperature and make sure the tip doesn't look all black and ugly. Just make sure it's shiny. Put a bunch of solder on it, wait for it a little bit, and then wipe it down. It should look something like this, like really nice and clean, like that. Well, not that side, but like this side. All right, so now the ESC is prepared for the motor wires. Now, the way that I'm going to execute these motor wires are from the inside here. Now, it doesn't matter the order you place them in, but it does matter that each 3 will take one motor. So the 3 in this corner will take this motor. The 3 in this corner will take this motor, or you'll have a really big problem. So keep that in mind. So right now, what we want to do is grab our motor wire. Make sure you're comfortable. That's very important on this step. Make sure you're as comfortable as possible, and you're not going to be letting this go anytime soon. Now I'm going to attempt to do it with no tweezers here. So I'm going to heat up the pad, bringing the wire, and then just hear that crushing, beautiful sound. And the wire just got really, really hot, so I had to let go just in time. Now I would prefer to add a bit more solder on top of that. So what I'll do is I'll add a lot of pressure with the soldering iron, make sure it's not going to flip. then grab my tweezers, and you see that you just have to be very careful with these sometimes. Okay, that wasn't the most beautiful one I've ever done, but you know, shit like that happens sometimes. And here we're gonna do the second one together. Add solder here, bring it into place, make sure you're comfortable and you've rested your forearms. And I'm gonna bring this last one into place here. There we go. I'm gonna just heat up the pad first, then bring in the wire. And that'll give us a really nice connection. So it's always very good to double check that nothing is touching. I really hate that first one. Maybe I'll come back and fix that later, but it's gonna be fine. So we'll just do one more motor together here, just so you get an idea. So, and again, as you can tell, I started soldering from the left because I'm right-handed, and it just makes my life a lot easier here. Now, and again, I'm gonna come in, heat up the pad, put the wire into place, and just add some pressure. Okay, really nice. Same thing I'm gonna do for this one here. Might start to get a little bit more difficult because we have more wires in the way. Okay, there we go. And see how easy everything is melting? That's because I have a pretty high temperature. But again, if you have it at a super high temperature like I do, you want to keep feeding the tip solder or it'll go black and nasty. So try not to forget about the soldering iron. You want to keep it as clean as possible and just keep adding solder as you're working. And there we go. We have a really nice motor wire set into place here. Very nice. The execution looks good. And I'm going to skip over the rest and we'll come back and see what's the next step. All right, so now we have all the motors into place here, and we're gonna leave the Xt60 for last. So what I've done next is I brought my flight controller, and here are the VTX wires. What I've done is I've routed them below the flight controller, below the ESC, and they're gonna pop right here, just enough for us to solder them on the VTX here. Now, what we're gonna need to look for is the DC input, which is the voltage input, the ground, smart audio, and vid, which are gonna be the first 4 on this guy. So, and again, what I like to do is add solder first. So I'm going to add solder to the ground. Usually ground will be the hardest thing to solder to because it kind of dissipates really well. So here we put too much, and as you can tell, you can just easily take that off. And then here we have one more. There we go. All right, so the first one we're going to need is ground, which is the black wire here. So let's just go ahead and grab it into place and just place it in there. There we go. DC in is going to be the voltage, which was the 9 volt that we've set up on the flight controller. Next is smart audio, which we set it as, I think, I'm just going to double check here, which was T4. It was the green one. So smart audio is the green one. There we go. And the last one is the video, which was the white wire. And as you can tell, I'm touching the pad first before the wire itself here. So like this, we're basically done now. So I'm just going to install the connector from the ESC. So now this has a connection and it gives the flight controller power. And as you can tell, the video transmitter wire are going from under here, under this, all the way down to the VTX over there. And our receiver is already done here. And this is for our camera. So we're basically kind of done now. So what we need to do is just apply the power. So right now we want to go to the Xt60 connector where the battery is going to be connected. Now I was going to have this go through the top of the frame, but it'll make it much more difficult when I want to work on it and remove the upper frame, because I was thinking of putting it through like this, and I'm just thinking about it saying, maybe that's not really a great idea. So what I'm going to do instead is I'm going to bring a heat shrink and some zip ties, and I'm going to hold it to the standoff right here. Now let's just double check if we'll have some space to do that. Yeah, we should be totally fine in that perspective. And we want to make sure that the propeller is not going to strike it. So we're going to bring in a propeller and double check it, because this is the thing that sucks with top mount frames usually, is having the Xt60 placement. All right, so here I've brought a prop just to simulate how far. This is a 5-inch prop right here. Now, what I like to do is bring a heat shrink like this one here. I'll have a link to a pack that, that lasts me more than a year usually. It comes with all different sizes and everything. So what I'm gonna do here is I'm gonna install the heat shrink onto the wire itself, split the wires just like that, and then I'm just gonna push it right in with the Xt60. And we're also gonna use zip ties. And now when we shrink it, there is no way in hell that that's going to come into a prop strike here. So I'll just try to simulate this as best as possible here. So you can kind of see that there's still plenty of space, and obviously when it's heat shrunk, it's going to hold very nicely. However, you want to make sure you get the top of the Xt60 connector around this area, because that's where the solder had made it very rough. Because if you got it here, then it's just going to flop. So here it's not going to go anywhere, and that's what you want to kind of look out for. So I'm going to keep this just like this right now, and we're going to add solder to the pads first. So keep the heat shrink, don't forget the heat shrink, very important. All right, so right now I'd highly recommend you increase your temperature before you start putting solder on the battery terminals here. And let's just go ahead and do that. And this is the way I like to do it here. Don't keep it on for too long, because it's going to start seeping through the other side, because these have holes in them right now. So for example, the positive here is, if we take a look at the bottom, we could actually see it going down. So a way to fix that issue is to hold the whole thing upside down and touch that pad again and let gravity bring it back to the other side. So just that's like the best way to do it right now. There, I can see it all falling through. There we go. Just wait a little bit on it. So now I brought it back because I held the whole thing upside down. Just be very careful, and the solder should pop back into place here. So let's start with the positive. We saw the positive was on the right side, so let's go ahead and do that together right now. So I'm going to touch the positive just like this. I don't want to hold it for too long, because then it's going to start going to the bottom. So I've heated it up slightly, and now I'm waiting for the wire to heat up the rest here. I'm going to put it on a little angle here. There we go. Now we have the positive into place. Now it's going to be the negative. I'm just double checking if this will fit. Yep, that's perfect. All right. And make sure you put the heat shrink. That's very important. And now we're going to do the negative here, or the ground. So just pushing it in. Heated up the pad, and then I went on top of the wire. Started heating up the wire itself. Very nice. So don't forget the low ESR capacitor. So we're going to have to get kind of creative on this one. I wanted to put it below it, but it wasn't going to fit that great. So this should be into place like this now on that. And that looks pretty clean. And it's going to be a bit tricky to add this low ESR capacitor. So let's start with the negative here. Now I'm going to touch from the edge. Now make sure you keep a lot of pressure on this, because you don't want the wire to pop out also. So you want to start from the bottom of it. See, the wire already started to move, so you got to be very, very careful. You might want to add a little tiny bit of solder on top of that. And you want to bring in there we go. So that was a pretty terrible way to do it. And this is not how I was planning on doing it. And it seems to be held very well. So I kind of lucked out on that one. It's preferably to always put the capacitor before the wires. It's better, especially if there's holes. But I don't know, I just half-assed it, or this one just didn't have long enough pads here. So you're gonna need a tweezer again, and we're gonna do the same concept here. So I'm just gonna move this out of the way a little bit. You want to keep pressure on the wire, or else the wire will jump out. Okay, bring in that, and add a little solder always. Uh-oh, here it is. The heat dissipation is, see, now everything will melt into place really nicely. I'm gonna bring my tweezers. Now, something you need to take note of once you do this is you don't want to twist this, because if those two touch together, your capacitor will blow up, and you can cause some really, really bad damage for your components here. So let's set up this Xt60 now. So there we go. Now we have our Xt60, and I'll probably put a zip tie around this just to hold it into place later. But right now everything looks to be done. So we have the VTX. Now make sure you never boot this on without an antenna on your video transmitter. So you can tell this is how I have the video transmitter into place right now. And it's going to be connected via MMCX. Now even when you plug this in, obviously there's still no antenna. So be careful and don't boot it, or else you'll burn the video transmitter here. So now as you can tell, the camera is into place here. And we're just left with this wire here for the on-screen display, which will route somewhere else, and I don't like how these are being routed. You don't want anything touching this part, because this is the gyro. So I'm just gonna make sure I route everything below the flight controller here. Nothing touched this wire or this part right there. That's very important, or it'll cause problems that you won't know how to fix. All right, so now we're basically done. We just need to route our receiver. So let's do this together. So what I'm gonna do first is I'm gonna get some zip ties. And another thing you're gonna need is heat shrink. Now, I'd highly recommend the heat shrink that I've linked down below because they just give you a whole kit with different sizes that come in baggies like this, and that'll last you a trillion years. Even with the amount of things I build and fix, one of them lasted me more, like one combo lasted me more than, I don't know, like 2 years or a year and a half, and I still have some of it left over. All right, so what I want to do first is I want to get a zip tie here, and I want to set it up just like this. I want to make sure that the head is going to be pointing this way, so I'm going to bring this one back, and this is going to hold the antenna into place under the propellers, and this way it'll give us protection for the receiver's antenna here. So there we go. I'll show you how that went right now. So make sure you don't want to tighten it too much to the point where you're gonna rip a wire. So just be careful with that. Okay, there we go. So now we have one pointing backwards, and as you can tell that the zip tie is on the bottom, the head is on the bottom. So I'm gonna do the same thing to the other side. So now we're left with the zip tie that does this here. I'm gonna trim it slightly right now because this is where our receiver antenna are going to be placed with the heat shrink, and that's going to hold them into place there. So as you can tell, now we have this here. So what I'm going to do next is I'm actually going to drop this under the flight controller, but I highly recommend before doing that is actually adding a heat shrink on it. But then again, before adding the heat shrink, make sure you bind it because then that'll make it more difficult. But most of these usually come with conformal coating. However, me personally, I don't trust conformal coating against carbon fiber. Because it'll just easily peel that off and you'll get a short circuit. But the whole idea here is we're going to put a heat shrink and then we're going to set it back there. And the receiver's antennas are going to be routed with these zip ties. However, we're also going to be using the heat shrink. So we would actually slide in the heat shrink here, and then we'd slide in also the antenna, and then we'd heat shrink it. But do that after you bind and you've set up your receiver already, or else it'll just make things a little bit more difficult. Now I also recommend you either add electrical tape around your receiver and not just leaving it just exposed the way it is, or adding a heat shrink. And again, you could find the perfect size of heat shrink with the kit that I'm going to link down below. Alright guys, and here is the complete build right now. I've already booted it and pre-configured it on Betaflight. Now what's really cool with this frame is it has so much space inside that we'll also be able to add some sort of a split camera like the Runcam 3S split, which is my favorite. And we can also even add the caddx. So I have a caddx replacement on the way right now, which I'm thinking of actually adding into this later on, because the whole idea of this frame is to not get the props in shot. So you'll have very nice footage without having to mount a GoPro up here, but either way I'm still going to mount my GoPro Session up here. And I found this anti-slip pad here because it doesn't come with any, so my battery won't be sliding back and forth while I'm flying, which is something really you kind of want here. They also do provide you with this battery strap, which seems to be of good quality, and it holds down the battery very well, and that's really great. And here are the receiver's antennas mounted into place here. And if we take a closer look at that, we could see that the wires go here, go under this zip tie, and then they spread out into those that we placed in there. And just make sure nothing is touching the flight controller or the gyro up here. Nothing's touching either the ribbon cable, so it doesn't give you any weird vibrations or wobbles or any kind of sporadic movements in the air. And well, that's gonna conclude it for this video, guys. I really hope you guys enjoyed it. Let me know what you think down in the comment section. Everything here is linked down below, from the tools to the heat shrink to everything. If you want to go ahead and check those out, those greatly support the channel. And the flight footage will be upcoming soon, and I'm really liking how this came out. It's just insane. I really hope I don't wreck it from the first day. Now, I think they are using titanium shafts here, as I understand, but I'll double check that and we'll know in the later video. And I'll see you in the next one. Peace out, guys.